160 grams of fresh Cubensis tea, a first and last level 5 experience, posted to the Shroomery forums on the 27th of January 2014. I thought the cubes I had were weak, to be honest. I ate 50 grams of them, small little fresh mushrooms. I just got this slight buzz. Later that week, I used 60 grams to make a tea, and I reached maybe a level 2 trip, which I might say was really fun and relaxing. So a week passed by, and a long weekend finally came around. I made some tea with 80 grams of mature, fresh cubes, as well as a tea bag and a shot of lemon juice for my wife and I. My wife drank her tea first and settled down with an LMN movie while I made my tea. I drank mine down fast and wasn't expecting much at all from it. But around 45 minutes later, I had this slight buzz, although that was to be expected. This being a long weekend off from work, I wanted to really enjoy myself, so I chopped up 80 more grams for another tea. I knew this was about 16 grams dried, but after all, they were weak shrooms, right? My wife told me to give it a little longer because she was feeling great. Of course, like a true man, I didn't listen, and I drank down the 80-gram tea I had just made. I had drank 2 cups of tea made from 160 grams of fresh mature shrooms. So, in theory, this would equal 16 grams of dried shrooms. What the hell was I thinking? My wife's movie was finished, so I grabbed the remote and started digging around through the channels. And suddenly, it hit me like a train. I felt this hot flash surge through my body, and I went from a buzz straight to a level 4 in a matter of seconds. I thought to myself, now this is more like it. I usually just sit and chill when on shrooms, but this time I couldn't stop talking, and I could not sit still. My wife was laughing so hard at me that she was actually losing her breath. I remember thinking that this is the most fun I have ever had in my entire life. I felt like I only weighed 20 pounds, and when I moved, I just floated around. Every colour was extremely vivid, and everything I looked at seemed to move and flex. This went on for probably a few hours. If it had stayed like this, it would have been the best experience I have ever had. If you have ever been on high doses of mushrooms before, you will know that the weirdest shit can put you on the unchanging path to a bad trip. This is why it's so important to plan every detail out ahead of time. But I still assumed that these were weak shrooms, right? My wife had been playing with Bruce, our pet gerbil, which was really not a good idea in our current state. She'd left the cage unlocked, and of course, Bruce set out on an adventure that would change his life forever. In the meantime, I was still floating around, saying, "Damn, I really need to shut up, I can't stop talking." This was until something in the kitchen caught my eye. It was Bruce munching down on a shroom cap that had dropped on the floor whilst making the tea. Me and my wife both freaked out, worried that little Bruce would die from eating the shroom. We caught him, put him back in his cage, and observed him for a while. After a few minutes, he was staggering around with his ears laid back and his eyes really wide. He would climb up in his wheel, then change his mind and go back to his chew toy. I knew he was tripping his little ass off and would be fine in the end, but my wife started crying, which put us both on the bad trip path. She decided to go to bed, but there was no way on earth I could even sit down, much less trying to go to sleep. This is where my level 5 trip started. Looking back now, I think talking to her kept me in check with reality, and could have been my body's only defense against a massive dose of shrooms I had taken a couple hours earlier. I tried to watch TV, but it made absolutely no sense to me at all, and even if it would have, I couldn't hold my attention on it for longer than a few seconds. The TV remote was way too complicated to try and figure out, so I decided to go and check on Bruce again. I went down the hallway into the dark room where his cage is. The darkness was so amazing to me. I could see millions of bright orbs of colours, and some of them would explode like fireworks into a million more orbs. Some were bright white circles with thousands of spikes sticking out of them, and they would shrink down to nothing and then reform again. Bruce, the gerbil, must have seen them too, because he was just sitting there staring into the darkness. I decided that I would just stay there and chill with Bruce and just watch this light show take place. I could only make out the carpet through the dark. It was flowing like water and seemed to almost ripple when I touched it. While doing this, I noticed my hand and I didn't recognise it at all. It was like I'd never even seen it before, and it startled me that I had this attached to the being I knew I was at the time. At this point in the trip, I completely lost the ability to move. I sat and thought hard about who or what I really was. I knew I was in a strange place I'd never been before, but I was sitting in my home of 10 years. After a while of trying to figure this out, a tiny thought of reality came through my mind, and I remembered that I had done shrooms earlier, and I was actually just high right now. This is where it got really confusing. I tried to think about what it meant to be high, but I couldn't remember what it was like to be sober, because in all honesty, I couldn't even remember who or what I was. I tried to think about drinking tequila and the high that it gives you, but I convinced myself that it wasn't true, and I was just making it up to try and change the reality I was in at this time. I thought to myself that there is no way that the liquid in the cabinet could make you feel any different if you drank it. It was like this was reality, and my memories were just pieces of dreams that were running through my mind. I finally decided that this is just the way it is, and I need to enjoy it somehow, whatever the experience is. Bruce must have been wondering why the hell his tail kept following him around, because he suddenly jumped on the side of his cage and started scaring the living shit right out of me. To be honest, it kind of snapped me back a little bit, because I was finally able to move again. I got up out of the floor and staggered to the bathroom. It took me a while to find it in this strange place. I looked in the mirror, and it just looked like a picture of someone I knew from the past. I really did not recognise my reflection whatsoever. I closed my eyes, and I couldn't tell if they were open or closed in reality. I could see millions of colours, as well as shapes and bright orbs. I felt like my face was wet, and then I realised I was slobbering because my mouth wouldn't work. I finally got the water on and splashed my face. I could feel the wetness, but the temperature had no meaning at all. I made my way over to the toilet and took a leak. It was now, for the first time in hours, that it finally dawned on me that I was a person, and was extremely fucked up. I tried to think of familiar things in my life to try to remember what it was like to be me earlier that day before I had drank the shroom tea. This was the strangest feeling I've ever had in my life. I couldn't even remember what I was like. Trying to think about a personality was way too confusing at that moment, so I tried looking at the pictures hanging on the walls and remembering the day we took them. I looked at my guitar and all these other objects throughout the house. Some of them just looked like a jumbled up mess, and others had memories tied to them. After what seemed like forever, I was able to get myself calmed down and head back towards reality. I walked towards the kitchen and noticed I had something in my hand. It was a Glade plug-in air freshener. I still don't know how the hell I ended up carrying it around that whole time, but I tossed it away and washed my hands. The water looked like it was flowing in slow motion, and was silver like mercury. When I put my hands under it, I couldn't really feel it, but I got a strong, sweet taste in my mouth that seemed to turn salty the longer I held my hands under the water. I started to feel a little sick by this, so I decided to try and lay down on the bed. My wife woke up and asked me if I was alright. I tried to tell her what had happened, but I couldn't put sentences together, so I just told her that I was okay and that I loved her. I left the lamp on the entire time, because the dark was just too bright with all of the colours I was seeing. I laid there for what seemed like hours trying to figure out what I had just experienced. I looked at the clock, and I had been tripping for 7 hours straight. By now, I was totally exhausted to say the least. I could even still see some of the colours while I was trying to go to sleep, and I could actually see faint orbs the next day, even when I was sober. I have learned to respect mushrooms to the fullest extent now. Even if they seem weak at first, trust me, they are not. I will make more tea eventually, but I will never go this far down the rabbit hole again.